Oh, hey.
Hello, Joey.
I'm Joey Camire. I'm the CEO of SYLVAIN and Upstatement.
I'm Mike Swartz, co-founder of Upstatement.
And we're here to talk about being hot models. We're talking about AI and our orientation to work. And I think my orientation is probably extremely cautiously optimistic.
And I think AI is best understood as a media and a medium and less as a technology for our purposes.
We had been having a group chat with me and Mike Burns, the CTO at Upstatement, just sort of like actively making it a point to try and track all of the conversations and developments within AI. And at some point, Molly had reached out and was like, what are you guys talking about? Is there some utility in that? And Mike exported the conversation. She's like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like, we're talking about sort of the state of AI and the broader economy and sort of what new tools are coming out, where are the pitfalls, how can we be sort of as leaders in our companies sort of informed enough to set the table so that we're not both so overextended into AI that we're making dumb mistakes, but also, not so cautious that we're being left behind. And so that group chat became this active place to be like, what is this? Are you concerned also about this? Or this is pretty cool. And someone's like, actually, no, it's not. It's a total vaporware. And it was just this active thing that we've had going for, 10 months or something.
A long time, yeah. I love the group chat because I think it's a microcosm of like what everyone's doing right now, which is co-processing this moment and some combination of news that is real, news that is not real, and trying tools, and then sort of imagining and extrapolating what this could be like in the future, and then some amount of wish casting about what we want it to be like and what it's actually like.
Yeah.
And that's just 3 people in there. I guess Johnny's in there now too. So there's 4 of us, but I think everyone's doing this on a macro scale in public with each other, and I think that's part of this moment that we're in, is just making sense of this new landscape.
Yeah, I think wish casting feels right, and I think it, like, in the beginning of the conversation, right, it was probably more wish casting because it started maybe right before Claude Code had launched, and we're like, what's this thing? And you're like, oh no, like this thing is a significant step change in the conversation. And so then it was like, are any of us going to have jobs? Are we all going to be, is this the Matrix? That sort of flash of like, this is a, what Robin Hanson calls like a view quake, where a insertion of an idea forces you to completely evolve your worldview on something. I think in a lot of ways, and particularly for someone like Mike Burns or companies like Upstatement, where we're doing engineering as part of the work that we're producing, something that is able to do engineering so clearly, that is a view quake. I think Claude Code and then Codex and sort of other agentic tools have sort of forced a view quake. What's interesting is it's happening at different cadences.
Yeah, totally. I think it's interesting. It's great to have different roles and orientations to it in there, because some of us are really close to the tactical execution of things that tools like Claude Code or other ones speed up. And then we're also examining it on like an economic level, and we're obviously concerned about what this does to labor, what this does to our agencies, and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're already starting to allude to it, but this is the first time bringing this very productive group chat into real life. What is the topic, Joey, that we're focusing on today?
We're focusing on the ways in which we can use these new tools, and they are proliferating quite quickly, to be able to produce good work. I think the 2 firms, SYLVAIN and Upstatement, are professional services firms at the highest level, but then sort of break out into different types of services where AI is quite relevant to a lot of what we do. But I think in both instances, we have built these companies that are trying to be, exceptional at what they do, to exude excellence, to be smart and effective and, beautiful and slick and all of the things that you want to be in producing work. And now you have this sort of sudden development of a tool that everyone is sort of fundamentally being forced to use. And so it is, in some ways building the plane while you fly it. And so we want to be able to talk about how do you produce good work with these new tools.
Yeah, I feel like we've always been searching for tools that make our work better or make work possible in any case, because some tools can kind of present an incremental improvement in the quality or your efficiency in making it. And some tools enable things to be made that you could never make before. And I think at this moment, we're also seeing the potential for using these tools to create bad work. Terrible and damaging work is just as high as the good work. And I think that's one of the things that we're co-processing in there, is really figuring out how can we direct these tools, how can we govern them, which ones should we use, and how. And I think that's the orientation that we all have as people that are craft oriented. Like, how can we actually use this thing to make things better?
Yeah, I think the in a lot of ways, both our conversations, but the thing that I think about a lot is that I feel like I'm in a perpetual risk assessment, right? And, everything, life, business, like that's normal, but it feels so accelerated because you're simultaneously seeing someone use a tool that's doing something really incredible. And then the next thing you see is someone like shooting themselves in the foot, right? Like a law firm, like a huge white shoe law firm, one of the best in the world, is getting, sanctioned for having hallucinated citations in like court documents. But then the next thing you see someone, we produced a tool that is now driving $1 million of revenue a day. And you're like, how are both of these things are true at the same time, and is coming down to how you use it. But that question of like, can we get some efficiency here? What is the risk of getting efficiency here? What does a failure case look like? Is it worth doing that thing? I feel like I'm constantly in that mode.
Yeah, and I think it introduces new failure modes that weren't possible before, like an agent sending emails on your behalf to a client that you didn't see or approve. That's something that couldn't really happen before, and so there's those possibilities. And then it's also challenging existing ways of working and existing paradigms where you're like used to spending a lot of time making something right because it took so much time to create it, and so polishing it and getting it to that moment was a lot of the work that we were trained to do. And now in some cases that's no longer the case. You can make something very quickly and then completely throw it away and make something new, which is just nothing we've ever experienced before. There's never been that sort of orientation to the prototypes even that we're making.
Yeah.
So we were getting a little bit into this next section, discerning signal versus noise. Mike, I understand that you're an early adopter of a lot of technologies, so AI is just one of those. How do you stay clear-eyed enough to make those good calls and not get drawn into the hype machine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like Upstatement wouldn't exist if we weren't constantly trying new tools and trying to see what they did, and then exploring them, and then critically analyzing them. So I feel like the loop is to understand what's happening and take in a lot of signals. So this is where I purposefully sort of swim in the maelstrom of what's happening on X, what people are yapping about, like new tools that are being released, and you kind of have to accept some quotient of like that. Some of that stuff's not going to be real. Some of it's not going to be as useful as you thought, but you kind of have to touch it and make that decision for yourself. And I think there's a criticality that you bring, which is often lacking, especially in like thought leadership around this, because there's almost no criticality where they're like, you have to start using this, everyone's using this, if you're not using it, you're behind.
Yeah.
There's a lot of incentives for people to present messages like that, but I try to take in the signal of like, what is this thing, and can I use it? And then can I bring my critical judgment to be like, okay, was this actually that useful, or should I have just been using something else instead? So it's a lot of rapid intake and a lot of processing, but then like constantly kind of going up and down levels to be like, put your hands on the tool, and then step back and be like, should I ever use this again or know about it?
Yeah.
Over and over and over again in pretty small loops.
Yeah, I mean, I think that experimentation is such a big part of it. I think in the recent, let's call it the past 6 months, because there has been a pretty significant uptick in capability of a bunch of the frontier models, more people are adopting now. But this is their sort of first entree into the tools, and not like pulling the I like the band before anyone knew about them type of thing, but I think the people who were playing with the tools when they were like much more clearly not ready for like the main stage, developed a fluency with their capabilities and identifying flaws, and a level of caution with those tools at that time that I don't think, if you show up and a thing is already capable to do it, when you didn't see like round 1, 2, 3, 4, where it was like making massive mistakes that were extremely obvious that taught you to be cautious. Like, I think that is like a trap that I'm seeing right now, where people are picking it up and being like, this thing's incredible. And it's like, of course, yes, it is. And also it's hallucinating like crazy, but it is more subtle and deceptive now. And that sort of internal mechanism of saying like, you better double check that. Yeah. Is that right? Did it just make that up? Can you give me a citation? Like, can I go look at that citation myself? Like those types of behaviors that were established when you're like using ChatGPT in like a Bing browser window versus, working with like Claude Code and an agent that is like, ordering dog food for you while like, reformatting your kernel or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think that loop of criticality that I just talked about it's also important to kind of hold those opinions loosely, because they will be updated pretty quickly. And I think that's one of the failure modes we've seen, especially around coding with some of these models. The beginning of 2025, it was a true fact that they were just not very good at lots of things and not very controllable. And actually, as a developer, they would waste your time. And you would have spent a lot of time setting them up and not get very far in whatever your project was. And that shifted so quickly over the summer and into the fall of last year. I think that's where you saw people who actually went through this loop, and they were like, let's try this tool. And they rightfully decided it was not ready for production. It could not do what they wanted. And if you had decided that in May of 2025 and held that opinion until October, you actually would be missing out on quite a lot of gains and improvements. And again, you're not missing out forever. You can actually pretty quickly snap back into it. But I think plasticity of opinion is one of the most important things to have here, and just activate that criticality loop and be like, well, it didn't work 2 months ago, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work right now.
Yeah. I think that's like that plasticity of opinion is, I think it's important regardless. If we weren't in this window, I think it's important for like being innovative or experimenting or sort of pushing the boundaries on things. But I think it's that much more critical. And the other part of this that I think that plasticity of opinion matters is sort of in the expertise conversation. And like, I've seen this myself in things that I've done where I'm like, man, this thing sucks at the things that I'm expert at, but it's so great at things like other people do because I don't have the expertise. And I think in that conversation where you have this tool that is giving you as an individual sort of like an expanded T-shape, right? Like you have your zone of expertise and whatever shape that is, but now like baseline areas, right? My code base was like building like a WordPress site and like brokenly sort of adjusting the PHP and CSS in like 2007 or something. Like now all of a sudden I can like do things that are so, it's giving a kid a knife and like throwing them in the kitchen and be like, make dinner,
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things as you sort of like, when you're talking about the T-shape and the ability to sort of explore more domains and more potential than you ever had based on your limited skill set, is that making good work actually kind of looks the same as it has forever, which is you actually have to dig in and you have to work with it. And it's like you're using a different set of interfaces now. You might be using natural language instead of whatever code was actually powering the experience, but you still have to spend the time. There's no one-shots for good work, and you need to actually see what's happening there and learn the grain of the system and really just tune it all the way. And that's where I think the old rules are still true, which is you're still using your fundamentals of craft and judgment. If you're a designer, you're still spending a lot of time sweating the details.
Yeah.
If you're an engineer, you're still doing systems thinking and architecture. You just might be using sentences instead of syntax that you learned. But I think that's where I've seen a lot of the skill set that you've built, and even if you're like more classically or academically trained, is actually more valuable than ever.
Yeah, I think that one-shotted point is sort of really important, right? The criticality, I think, is the thing that is one of the areas that I worry the most about, like particularly for, like our strategy teams or things like that, where in some ways fundamentally that is like the core skill, right? It's curiosity, it is, being able to be analytical, but the idea of saying, like, does this work? Can it be better? What can I do? When you have a thing that is like spitting out answers at you, if you're not sort of forcing it through your algorithm of your sort of cognitive style, your experience, your understanding, your expertise, all of the reps, the sitting in the gym and throwing up the basketball 10,000 times to like understand and develop feel and all of that, like that exercise, you take the human out of the loop, like it's fine, but you ultimately wind up in these situations where sort of like in that MIT paper that came out where there's like a bunch of gradients of like, conformity versus differentiation and centralization versus decentralization, and like the AI models are all pushed in one direction, that sort of homogeneity of the solutions that come out, like, that human knowledge collapse, like I worry about that.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say like I think one of the reasons I compare it to media is that the old like models of media literacy apply, and understanding what is bad work is actually harder than ever, because in so many cases it actually looks and signifies things that good work signifies, and that's where you have to look a lot deeper and develop that skill set.
Related to both of these things you were just talking about, Joey, you've said before that AI is helpful often in how it's wrong as a clarifying function. Can you speak more to that and how that relates to our work here at SYLVAIN and using AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you just said, Mike, right? Like sometimes 80% there can still be fundamentally broken, right? Like you're like, oh, this feels almost like it's right, but like, you put it into practice and something falls down, there are still failure modes embedded in it. And I think oftentimes when I'm going into modeling, and maybe this is a skill issue, you could tell me it's a skill issue of I'm going in and I'm asking a question and giving a ton of context and sort of trying to set the stage to allow like a model's intelligence to fit into the shape of the problem that I'm looking at. That exercise for me is like a forced clarification in sort of like the Sapir-Whorf effect type of way. Like by me putting words to those ideas, I'm crystallizing it for myself, and then it spits out a response. And oftentimes I'm like, well, that part's definitely wrong, and that part's wrong. And that exercise of like, it's sometimes literally I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense, that's not true. And it responds something, and I'm sharpening my orientation to it. And I find that extremely useful. And I think, that is in a realm of like strategy work, like high context environments, running organizations, trying to understand personalities and things like that there's too much context to fit into the context window of one of these chats. But that for our work, any human organization is a high context organization. And so being wrong for me and identifying the wrong feels like one of the most valuable aspects of it. Like truly valuable. That's not me diminishing what, like, it is helping me get to breakthroughs faster in the things that I'm trying to understand and break and find sort of places that I need to dig deeper.
I think what you're talking about is like your engagement with the work, and there's a couple things that tools like this can cause. It can do what you just described in the good moments, where it can increase your engagement with the problem and sort of speed up your loops of engaging with that problem and find out what's wrong or find out what's right and truly stimulate like new ideas. But there's also a level where it can cause you to disengage with the problem. And that's where you sort of see like, the push button, like my paper's due tomorrow. I barely started it, please do the work for me. And then you're sort of like, you're distancing yourself from the work of understanding what you're doing and getting sharper about it. And I think the risk of that is extremely high in a lot of fronts, like whether it's strategy work or communications work or design work. And I think that's one of the things that we talk about in the group chat is like how you engage with these tools, not just the fact that they exist, but how you actually engage with it is the whole ball game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of this, like, not to put our intern applications on blast, but there was we gave an assignment. Just we have hundreds and hundreds of applications. Like maybe I think last year was like 1,500 applications, and the assignments this year. There's a huge portion, like tens of percent that came with the same line for the strategy for this thought assignment, and I was like, oh no, like this is a problem. There were some great assignments that came out, but like a huge portion, like we gave Pinterest as an example. We tried to give a brand that's like maybe had been great and going through a moment, and how would you help them think about their product and think about their brand and how they're interacting with the world. And so Pinterest felt like an interesting one. It's not a company we work with. And we gave it, and everything kept coming back as like, Pinterest is about becoming. And so many of the assignments had that as a response. And you can imagine someone in that seat who's looking for an internship and saying like, oh, like I'm cooking, but then what they're not getting the opportunity to see is that next person down and that next person down and that next person down who's pumping out the same thing. And they may have put in a ton of effort, but the question is like, where was it in the right place? Did you apply your taste? And I think about that for us, right? Like if we were going into like a pitch situation, a company's like, we really have this big problem, come help us. And then like 3 to 5 companies like put in their submission in an RFP, and it's all like Pinterest is about becoming. Like, I don't. That is like horrifyingly embarrassing for me, and to avoid that situation is like, man, I would do a lot to avoid that.
Yeah, and even the internal work of leadership or running a company, like there's a lot of things you could do with that model where you're like, help me fix my costs, and it might give you some answers. And if you are not critical about those, or you don't bring your own thought to it, again, you're just sort of applying templates and letting the tool understand your company, which it does not, and not bringing yourself to it. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of the experience that people are having with AI tools in the world is not only are they being forced to use it in some kind of upskilling project, but they're also seeing leaders use it instead of using their own thoughts. And I think that's another version of your problem, but the risk isn't embarrassment. It is like true damage.
Yeah. I mean, there was that article that came out recently about all of your CEOs are using the same strategy. And there's been a bunch of instances recently where AI models are telling someone this is a thing to do, and then their AI chats are showing up in discovery and lawsuits, and it's like they're going through this exercise where they're not being like, I think it's a trap that all of us can fall into, right? Like, back and forth swinging between, Andrej Karpathy, like, who is this incredible like AI researcher and like building these frontier models, and also people are like, Andrej got one-shotted by some new thing that's happening. Like even someone who is at the sort of forefront of discovery with these models is susceptible to these moments where you sort of miscalculate, misinternalize what something is capable of because it shocks you, right? And you're like, I didn't think it could do that, and we overgeneralize and think it could do that in every situation, right?
Okay, so both SYLVAIN's and Upstatement's business models are built on thought partnership to a certain extent. In many ways, we believe that a good thought partner is essential for good work. So Joey, how has the growth of AI tools changed the value of that partnership, if at all? And are clients valuing it more or less?
I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think most of our clients are in the same position that we're in, right? They're trying to experiment, and sometimes that shows up in RFPs or sort of briefs that we might get from clients of saying like, if there is an opportunity for AI in this process, we'd like to talk about it, right? Of can this accelerate a process? Can you use a new tool that gives us a capability that we haven't been able? There's a handful of projects both at SYLVAIN and Upstatement in the past 6 months that were sort of fundamentally explorations within AI tools for an actual business objective for those companies, but saying like, how are we going to figure out a process to use some of these new tools to accomplish this thing with like eyes wide open? The challenge is the high context environments that all of these companies are sitting in with the market, with their internal teams, with sort of having a system that is already running, that is producing a product and revenue and supply chain issues, like all of those things. This system exists, and now there's a new tool on the outside, and it's trying to figure out, without shoehorning something in and breaking it, how do you improve this process in some capacity? I think initially it was so much about, the conversation has been about efficiency, like people getting efficiency pilled and saying like, okay, we're gonna cut the whole team. It'll be like, 3 dudes in a corner, like with, 17 codex windows open and, just cooking. Like that feels like it, for many reasons, a fundamentally flawed thing. Like if it's only 3 people running a $15 billion company, like who's buying those products and like where is that money going? And it doesn't work in sort of a larger economic system, right? Because it's like our companies are here, we're working with these bigger companies, but those bigger companies exist in a macroeconomic environment. And I think everyone is just pulling to try and expand the aperture right now, and it's hard. It may be fundamentally impossible on an individual level to like pull the aperture that wide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think about it in terms of what we used to sell as a fundamental capability, and we've always been about thought partnership. But what Upstatement did, especially as being a lot closer to expression, whether that's design or digital platforms and things like that, we used to sell access to the people who understood design, knew the typefaces, or the engineers that had memorized the runes that produced websites. And that was something that our clients didn't have access to, or they did and they kind of knew their limitations there. Now we're in a world where everyone has access to the same capabilities, actually, in a big way. So it's opened up access where our clients can code their own websites, or they can rapidly design a prototype of the new thing that they want to make. And then they start to realize that they need more context about how is this thing used, or did I use this capability in the right way? And how can I actually make it better? How can I make it more thoughtful? How can I make it achieve my goals? So we're less selling access to this capability, which used to be something that was a little more concentrated with agencies or specific people. And now we're selling understanding of how to use that access to actually produce some impact or some effect. Mm-hmm. And that understanding is still not well distributed and is still heavily concentrated in a few experts.
Yeah, I think in that professional services literature that exists from sort of like organizational psychologists and economists is like there's procedural work, there's custom work, and there's complex work. And what I think is happening and where some of this efficiency stuff comes from, like the way that they talk about procedural work in that literature is things that your company could do itself, but it's easier just to outsource it, right? And the classic example is like SAP infrastructure or things like that, where it's like, we have some engineers here that could set this up, but this other company focuses exclusively on doing that thing. It'll just be faster, like send it to them.
Support.
Yeah. But that area, I think, right now is being most heavily disrupted. And the question then becomes like, within custom work, which is like, we know how to solve this problem. We've done it before, we'll fix it for you. Or complex work is like new solutions to new problems. Like, I think increasingly the high caliber or successful professional services firms are having to shift, increasingly towards custom and complex work. I think both of our companies have always sat in those two zones, in the custom and complex. Like, not every problem that SYLVAIN or Upstatement solves for is like a new solution to a new problem, but a bunch are. But I think the custom ones too are still like, we don't have the expertise internally to solve this. And the question of whether, again, maybe the high context environment is like still that limiting factor, but the expertise of someone who understands a design problem, understands a strategic problem, understands an engineering problem, and can get to a solution faster, right? Still has value, even if I think that time compression challenge right now, everyone is needing to move faster, potentially creates more runway for companies like ours, because in order to get there fast, you need to have the reps. But it does sort of beg the question about like the collapse of expertise in the longer run sense.
Well, I think, and you used to have to make, especially as an agency or even as a person, you used to have to make pretty risky choices about what you chose to build capability in. Mm-hmm. Even if it was on a personal level, like, I'm a designer, should I learn how to code? That's going to be a big time investment for me. It's going to take me a while. I'm going to have to go through the worst before better. Or if you're an agency, should we hire a bunch of software engineers and have that capability on tap? Or should we outsource that to someone else, or just choose not to focus on it? And I think that when you're selling access to things, those are the choices you have to make to kind of get the supply chain of capability. And now you're in a world where you can have that expertise and that judgment about what you should make. And let's say if you did not have software engineers on staff, you could still make a prototype now, and you're not sort of locked out of that capability. So I think there's been a sort of disconnection of capability and expertise, which is going to be really interesting and is still just forming up. Mm-hmm.
Mike, this is related to what you're talking about. You said before that you see the thought partner side of yourself as a moat. Can you say more about that, and how does that inform how you're guiding your teams or encouraging others to upskill or change their skills going forward?
Yeah, I think, even as we've sold capability and access to specific experience, like we know how to make a website, the real function for our clients has been the relationship that we form with them. And that can sound corny, but the relationship is sort of the actual thing that produces that thought partnership. Mm-hmm. And the true understanding of each other. Like, they understand what we're capable of and what we know. We understand what their goals are and what their fears are. And then, through that relationship, you build a lot of context in the organization, and then you can bring on your expertise, which is a lot different than other people. And that's where you kind of get down to these experts can be very singular in only a few people have had experience with these specific problems, have had success solving them, have actually invested in the knowledge to be able to confidently recommend a solution. And so while now capability is widely distributed, that experience and that ability to form that relationship and truly understand a problem is still not widely distributed, and I think is more valuable than ever and more differentiated than it ever has been. And so that's where you can't look at agencies or even people and be like, even like a resume, you're like, I don't know, like that just shows me where you spent time. Yeah. It doesn't show me exactly what you're really good at. And I think now there's even more choice than ever, even amongst experts. Like, who do we choose to partner with? Like, I want to bring in the best in the world for this specific problem, like someone who truly understands how to make motion like this, or a writer that just does this. You now have that optionality. Even though you could get a tool to sort of produce work like theirs, you're not going to get to like the next original solution. And now you can form these relationships even amongst experts that produces truly amazing work.
Yeah, I think about the sort of like algorithmic model of how you look at other individuals. Like when we wrote a book years ago about influence, and there was this idea of like the God algorithm of like, what would Jesus do bracelets and things like that of it's an activity that as like social creatures we go through and say like, let me put myself in the head of another model and go through like a run because we have empathy of what would the judgment happen in this other thing. And I feel like it's relevant to this conversation with partnership and with how certain organizations become like organisms, right? We made a joke at an event maybe like a year ago about like hot models, right? Like creativity is fundamentally like through the lens of AI is like a hot model. Like you're coming up with a bunch of hallucinations. You just happen to have the ability to discern whether those hallucinations are like good ones. And so you come up with 1,000 bad ideas, but you're like, 2 of these are good. Let's like go test those. And I think that idea is relevant to this question of relationships and partnering and things like that. Like our clients that have worked with us in the past or know us independent of even the individuals within SYLVAIN or Upstatement. They're like, I know I can throw this problem into that algorithm, and on the other side something is going to come out that I appreciate. And I think some of that is built on culture and sort of unspoken dynamics, but any business that is based on creativity as like a core part of it, like has to embrace that hot modelness, and I think, I think, Mike, you're a hot model. I think that is like one of the things that you do really well. Like I've seen it when you're interacting with like a client or someone sharing a problem with you. You're like, what about this? And then, sometimes it's like absolutely insane. And then, sometimes you're like, oh no, that's like exactly what it is. Like you're sort of just looking at this problem in a different way. And I think that's what people need, right? Like if you're mirroring someone's expertise of like, I work at a financial services company, and we are a financial services consulting company. Like, let us help you solve your problem. It's like your expertise is almost mirrored. Yeah. And so I feel like it's not throwing it out into a hot model to get an alternative solution or a better solution or to push your own thinking. It's just like, let me like stare into a mirror for 6 months, and then at the end of it, I'll be like, I look pretty good.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where, to the point of like, CEOs using models to make decisions, like it will start telling you things like you should increase revenue and decrease costs, and that's
differentiation.
Yeah, exactly. I think about, back to the where does good work come from? There's a concept in, I think, David Pye's book, The Nature and Art of Craftsmanship. He talks about the workmanship of risk. And when to make good work, you're always taking a risk of some kind. And those moments you just talked about, where you're sort of being a hot model and you're saying, you have an intrusive thought and you say it, you might be wrong, but you're taking a risk to put it out there, slight reputational risk of some kind, and that's just about ideas. When it comes down to the craft, like, what Pi was talking about was when you work wood, for example, there's a risk that you're gonna fuck it up. Like your chisel's gonna slip and you're gonna screw it up. And part of craftsmanship was sort of like managing those risks and understanding the grain of it. And I think that's one of the things with these new tools is that there's actually kind of not much workmanship risk in the actual making of it. It will produce a smooth, flat surface. But the risk is actually that it's too smooth and it's too flat and it's too much like other things. And because it's just sort of bringing you forward solutions that have been decided to be within the like firm middle ground of like, this is acceptable. It's literally trained on like, what do most people find to be acceptable? Like how many thumbs up buttons do we get on this response? And I think when it comes to the craftsmanship, whether you're actually making something or you're just making decisions, having that relationship with risk where you're like gonna put yourself out there and you're going to try something, that is still a zone, back to your question, like that is a zone that many people do not know how to work in, or they're not confident enough to actually take those risks and manage them through to the conclusion.
Well, I think like the experimentation is so much, right? If you have a tool that everyone's like, this seems useful, but we're not sure what exactly it's for yet. And you have a group of people who's like, what happens if you press this button? Like, what happens if you press this button? I think, like when your BERT experiment is like a great example of like smashing the keyboard, BERT comes out on the keyboard, you think it's funny, it turns into a joke, and then you like are trying to build a harness for AI models through that. Like that's like such a hot model process. And maybe like clarification on like a cold model is like hyper analytical, hyper logical. A hot model is like hallucinating a lot. Like it's a AI term in case that's not clear, but I think like that's a prime example of like I punched the keyboard and somehow I wound up building a harness.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and this is I know we've been told not to get too technical. But the way that models work is that they're really generating little mountains of probability around different answers. And so if you start a sentence and I say Joey is a, and fill in the blank, and there's going to be a huge mountain of probability around person or man or New Yorker or CEO. There's going to be a lot less around hot dog or something like that. But that's the sort of hot modelness, is being like, let's look into the tails of the distribution here and find something unusual.
What if Joey was hot dog?
Yeah.
Joey, you have a quote which I think is related to what you're discussing: the human as a strange attractor in a cloud of deterministic models. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with cold models is that they're sort of taking a deterministic orientation to reality of like if this and that, and if in this probabilistic sort of cloud, the next token is this next word, hot dog, whatever. But humans are, like all people are really good at balancing back and forth. And some people are more sort of creative and hot model-y, and they go into the arts and things like that. And some people are more analytical and logical, and they sort of go into engineering or finance or whatever it is. But we can all swing on both sides of that. And I think that sort of intent and choice and sort of search for conceptual things like truth and beauty and all of those things. Like if we are a strange attractor in the center of deterministic models, what I mean by that is like all of these tools that we tap into are fundamentally like orbiting around some aspect of our consciousness, of our intent, of our desire to create or build things. And when you lose that center in these processes, when you're trying to just outsource those things of like, make me something beautiful, I have not even considered what I think is beautiful or what you think is beautiful if I'm trying to make a thing for you, you lose the strange attractor. Like strange attractor is I'm not going to pretend that like I have a deep understanding of Lorentz attractors. Like frankly, like it is about in chaotic systems that can be chaotic on a local level, they can be sort of predictable on a global level because there's something in the middle that is creating order within the chaos. And I think I just think the idea is like beautiful. Like it's a poetic thing within science of this idea of a strange attractor. But I think we are that, like organizations are that. There's sort of a cascading influence that I have on you, you have on me, that our companies have on our clients, that those clients have on other people, and trying to lean into the humanness and being discerning about where we're outsourcing it. Like if I'm doing a piece of work, a piece of strategy work for a client, I'm trying to solve their problem, but I'm also trying to do it in a way that I think is elegant, that is like harmonic, that is beautiful, that makes sense to me, and that it can do both things, that I feel good about it and it solves the problem and it makes people's lives better and it makes society better. But that chain is starting from my intent, from my discernment, my understanding of the world. And so I think there's value in that on maybe an existential level, on a sort of philosophical level. But I think that's where like any good thing that you like in your life, or that some great accomplishment someone has made up until now in human history at least, it starts from that. And I don't know whether that can change, you know.
I think, I mean, it's any creative exercise, and I mean creativity widely, like design or business or anything like that, is not a single player game, truly. And even if you think you're the sort of sole creator, you are influenced by your training set, and even like, you know, different sort of discriminators that you have thought of. Like you think, well, how would this person think of this? So when multiple people get together, and I think this is part of your strange attractor idea, you're really multiplying your probabilities against each other and coming up with a totally third data set. So there's more creation, there's just more of an explosion of things, and it's a multi-round thing. So like, you know, you say something from your experience that's within your training set, and that totally sparks me to look in a completely different place in mine. And then when we're sort of doing evaluation, then we're thinking like, there's not just one discriminator that is like picking like which is the good idea. We've formed a third sort of discrimination lens between us that actually helps select outliers that neither of us would have chosen. And I'm using this language purposely because I think this is something I've been, as I learn more about the internals of how models work, like from training sets to the actual reinforcement to the discrimination of like which of these outcomes are we going to pick and present back. It's actually very similar to how we work. We are just sort of, you know, our training set was lived experience, and our sort of reinforcement learning was what was socially acceptable to say, think, or do, and that just sort of embedded this in us.
When we started the company, and in part because, you know, I think we all felt like, Alen, Ben, myself, felt like there were different reasons where we weren't comfortably fitting into other organizations. Like we could be effective at our job, but like it didn't quite feel right. And so like the hope in creating SYLVAIN and the orientation to building the culture was always about being like, you can bring that whole data set, right? Like in the context of this conversation, your whole experience, you can show up and sort of be comfortable being like, I had this weird experience at like a music festival that like I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about at a normal job, but is relevant here. And if I tell you, that might trigger something in your data set, and we may be able to solve this, you know, challenge in a, you know, B2B SaaS company or something like that, based on, you know, someone going to Stagecoach or Coachella and doing a bunch of drugs. But like that idea of accepting the full data set, I think, is like super important.
I love where we're going right now. I was thinking about earlier, you were saying that SYLVAIN and Upstatement as well have built trust with so many of our client partners, and those relationships are really critical for you know, this moat, as we call it. What about someone who is earlier in their career and maybe doesn't feel as comfortable yet in their own judgment, or doesn't have strong relationships yet with clients? What advice would you give them, or what areas would you recommend that they kind of dig in on, especially these, you know, uniquely human areas that we were just talking about that might become even more important now that AI is so prominent?
Yeah, I think that I love this question because it's, you know, I advise a lot of really early stage designers, especially, that will come. I used to teach at Mass Art, so this is very real and existential for someone who's graduating, and they're like, where are the jobs? Even what skills do I invest in? And obviously, when you're at an early stage, you're investing in your own capability and capacity for doing work. And you're trying to figure out your craft, and you're like, how do I just make something good? But my advice to them is, you know, this sounds a little cliche, but was like, truly be yourself and like make it known to people. Like, don't try to pretend to fit into certain signifiers, you know. And again, with reason, like you can be a hot model and show up and act completely crazy. And we've had people interview at Upstatement where we're like, they cannot work here. Like that would destroy the fabric of our culture. But I think that putting yourself out there in a very real way, like what you're interested in and how that shows up in your work, you know, who you really are, like if you love cooking or you like this really weird thing, like I think especially now, don't be afraid to be a freak of some kind and put it out there. And the thing is, you might get a lot of people will be like, I'm not into that at all.
Yeah.
But that's also a really useful signal for you, because if you're really putting yourself out there in whatever level, whether it's the type of work you like or the things you're into, it's really good to know who's not into it. They also might shape you, because you'd be like, why are you not into that? And it's like, oh, turns out my work was really bad. I'll like change that in some way. But I think you're more likely to find people who are like, I see what you're doing, and that's really cool. And back to your pile of intern applications, like the ones that always stood out to me were the ones that I was like, this is so weird, or this is so interesting. And it's not even on a craft level. I'm not even looking at it like, oh, you can plug right into the design team or whatever. I'm usually like looking for originality and looking for like, first of all, it could be like, that was crazy that you had that thought and that you tried it. Or even, that was crazy that you told me about it, you know, which was a risk-taking activity on their part. But that's what causes, that's like when me and Jared and Tito or Scott and Nathan are passing stuff around. That's like how you get noticed and how you form true connection with actually like with people that you want to be around. And I think there's like obviously a force of homogeneity that happens. Like, I mean, school is almost purpose-built to kind of make people very similar, like little work-ready humans. But I think the more kind of differentiated and original you can be, and not in a forced way, but in a true way, that's the whole thing. And that'll direct everything you invest in, everyone you meet, especially early stage. Like that's how it worked for me, was like finding my people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the school idea is like, school is oriented like on a fundamental level, on like a societal level, is about elevating the floor. It's not about elevating the ceiling. Like that's not what that institution is built for. But I think if you as an individual take an orientation of like, the floor is raised, you're sort of holding back the opportunity to do something cool, to do something forward thinking, and the idea of like being weird, like I super relate to that. Like we talk about misfits at SYLVAIN in some ways, because I think we're similarly excited. Like I ran hiring for a long time, and I would see an application, I'm like, this is out there. Like, you know, like at some point we had that question just as like a I'm not a robot question in the application process, and someone wrote a whole thing about like fart humor and how her and her dad are like obsessed with it. And I'm like, great, like you're into the next round. Like let's have that conversation. And I think, but it fits with my own experience. Like in grad school, there was a group of us that had this weird website that was basically every week there was a topic, and we all had to create something and post it on this blog like every week. And it was like getting like 5,000 unique views a week. We didn't know who these random people were coming, but it was just this creative experiment. And all of the people in that project, when we sent out our books and you know, applying for jobs after grad school, almost to the one were hearing like, yeah, your book is fine, sure, but like I'm really interested in this side project. You know, like there's a guy, Charles Hodges, who now runs it and started an agency called Arts and Letters, but he had applied to Wyden. That was like the one job he wanted to do, to like work on Sports Center. And he got the job, but the recruiter was like, yeah, sure, your book, like, but like these videos that you were making about like pretending to be Paula Deen with an imaginary like butter product is like why we're hiring you. And so I think that the sort of newer generation, because of growing up on social media, as like truly as soon as they were like in middle school, like it already existed. There is a resistance, whether it's like ideas like cringe or whatever, to fail or get something wrong or do something dumb. Like the number of cringe things I can tell you. Ben and I made a stop motion video, like thank you video, to get our first job after we did the interview. And it's like, thinking about it right now like makes my skin crawl, but they were like, well, no one else sends us stop motion thank you videos, so I guess these guys must be like weird and interesting. And so I don't know, that self-censoring, not about like, can I say dirty words or like be a troll or an edgelord, but like
potty words allowed at this workplace?
Yeah, can we say potty words? But more about self-censoring with a fear of getting something wrong or someone not liking the thing that you produce sort of creates a pattern where you never jump into the hot model creative types of things. And that's hard. Like I still self-censor like now, right? I'm like, I want to write an article about this thing, but I'm like, either it's maybe an idea that only I'm interested in, so maybe I'm not going to put it out, or I want to make a video, or I want to, you know, like build a thing, but like maybe that's only for me. Like, are people also interested in like Ed Ruscha type phrases being like graffitied on the sidewalk? Because I am.
You'll never know if you don't put it out there.
Yeah.
I think that's the risk of not putting it out. And obviously, we have no problem making cringe content.
You put up Bert.
We're doing it right now.
Yeah. It was a real dry Bert.
Wait, what is Bert?
Bert is, you should tell me Bert.
Bert started as a joke. Well, it started as an actual problem I was having with, I was in like long Claude conversations, like trying to use it as a tool, like for research. It was like a big research project, and I was noticing that these conversations get super long. It would be really handy to be able to target specific pairs of like a call and response. So like deep in this like 2 mile tall thread, there was an actually good thing in there. There's no real way to call that out, to search for it, to search across threads where I could be like, find me every instance where like there was a good like prompt response pair that fit in this topic. So I started having a real problem, and then I started like sketching it out, and then this is the cool thing about the tools right now. Like I would have had that same idea if these tools didn't exist. I would have thought it, I might have written it down, and then I would have done nothing about it because it would have taken too long.
The technical complexity of it. Yeah.
Exactly, and that kind of, you know, you always make that calculation, like, am I going to actually get into this? And, you know, even like 2014, I built a whole JavaScript dashboard to track all of our Nintendo Blades of Steel games, and, like 1,000 plus with stats and advanced metrics about who's the best player in the office.
Sabermetrics on
Yes,
Blades of Steel.
no, literally. And I was like vibe coding before that was real. I was like using Meteor.js, and I was making this thing, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of effort. I saw this happening, and I was like, I never would have done that here. But because the barrier was so low to be like, well, let's start prototyping a tool, I eventually built a whole AI harness that can use Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini models in there, and you can actually just like sort and sort of search threads in a way that you never could before. None of the tools provide this. But the BERT part is I had to name it, and I was just like, and I smashed my keyboard and it typed the letters BERT, and I was like, oh shit. That's its name. Yeah. Bert is a person, and so the website is onlybert.com. And it basically became a giant joke, but that's actually part of the fun. And I feel like we've always said this about creativity at Upstatement, but it's like, just be funny. Like I think this was actually a David Ogilvy thing, where it was like your best ideas come when you are being funny, like fooling around, because that's where you start to like widen your probability mode. Yeah, you're relaxed. You're widening the set. That's why humor is like, like strange juxtapositions. And that's also extremely important for creative work. So a mode that we're often in is like making each other laugh, like goofing around, and until someone's like, actually, like that's actually a really good idea. Yeah. And then you can kind of get more into like the analytical mode.
Well, it's why the Google Project Aristotle thing that they did in like 2014 or something, where they studied teams and they put like A people all on one team, and they put like another team together that was like, well, maybe B team, just like random assortment of people, and they gave them the same problem. And the A team was like, I'm the expert at this, and I will tell you this, and they would have a full meeting, and the conversation would be only about the topic, and they go and do it. And the B team group was like shooting the shit through an entire meeting, and like sometimes talking about the topic, but sometimes laughing or being like, what are you doing on the weekend? And they were showing that consistently this team was doing better, because whether it was because they were building psychological safety, because they were having fun, because they were sort of sharing their full context set into a meeting to get things better, like that team was winning. Like when you're having fun, you're relaxed, you're making weird connections, you feel comfortable enough to share your full data set, and I think it matters. Also, like, we're doing a job, it doesn't mean it has to not be fun. Like the self-seriousness of things sometimes like really bums me out. Like, and I think is also where like being a CEO as a role, sometimes I'm like, yeah, but I can't stop thinking like certain things are funny. Like I just have to pretend like, correct, yes sir, you know. Like, yeah.
I want to go back to the previous question because I do want Joey, well, both of you, but specifically Joey, to talk about adversarial collaboration. It's something you believe so strongly in that you sent an email out to the whole team. So I'd love to hear what that means to you and why you felt like the team needed to hear that.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's sort of this, I see adversarial collaboration as sort of like a remedy to cognitive surrender, right? That idea of criticality that we were talking about before, of trusting that your collaborator is sort of entering within the best of intentions, but not trusting that they've landed on the correct solution without scrutiny. It's sort of an idea that exists in academia and sciences, right? If we're two labs collaborating on coming to, you know, some breakthrough in neuroscience or whatever the sort of arena is, that my lab is going to check your lab's data. Like you're saying, like we did all these regressions and here's the output and we have a positive solution to this thing that we're working on. I'm going to be like, can I see the math? Like you're going to check the math. And I think that idea of entering in to any sort of AI interaction with that adversarial collaboration, we're working together to solve this, but I'm not going to take any of your output for granted because I don't know, I want to understand it. I want to learn. I want to make sure that it's right. My human reputation is on the line. My pride in executing is on the line. And I think hanging on to that matters so much.
I think about it, yeah, I love adversarial collaboration, and I think it's a good way to describe like the best collaborations between people. I think the analogy I would use is like if you ask a friend, like, do you like my outfit? Like, should I wear this? And in that moment, I think there's adversarial collaboration because this person asking has to truly kind of be open to what the other person thinks about it. And if the other person is like, yeah, it's fine, you look fine, then I'm gonna be feeling like you don't care and you didn't actually care to kind of tell me. But if you're also like, no, I actually hate it. I think that jacket sucks, man. And if I was only asking you for validation, then I'll be like, well, fuck you. I like my jacket. Whereas if I was like, no, but like, what do you think? And you're like, actually, you should do this other thing because we're going to this important event. It would actually be better this way. Then it's like, there was true spirit of like kind of betterment when you asked and when you kind of entered into the collaboration, and then true care by the collaborator to be like, I thought about it. I know you. I know where we're going. I'm giving context. I'm going to give you what I feel like. And then there's some back and forth. But I think on both sides, like if you're sort of performatively asking, like especially in a model situation, if you're like, hey, I'm about to send this to the client, can you check it? And you're just asking because you just want validation, that's not real collaboration. And same if someone is reviewing your work and they're like, yeah, it looks fine. I don't really want to focus on this or help you get better at all. Then they've also abdicated their role as a collaborator. And I think this definitely has applied to people since forever, but it really applies to interaction with models. And that's back to that engagement with the work. Like if you're like, hey, can you turn in my assignment tomorrow? Like write the whole thing, make no mistakes, just tell me when it's done. I'm not engaging deeply. Whereas if you were like, I want to explore this topic with you, Claude or whatever, and then it comes back and you truly read it and understand what it's thinking, and then you're like, I think you missed this, or I think you got this wrong. Then there's often like, then you can actually get into a really interesting cycle with it, and not just the like, you're absolutely right style responses, but more like you're kind of being that collaborator with it, using its power, but then also like letting it inform and inspire you, just in the same way we were talking about like how people multiply their probabilities across each other.
Yeah, I think like there are unspoken rules. Maybe sometimes they get spoken, and you know, we have like a phrase like hard on the work, kind to each other, right? Which is fundamentally about like make stuff better, but like be cool about it. You know, like don't be rude. Like the work is separate from either you or me. This is a third thing that we are building together, and it is about like we can enter into this with respect so that I'm treating you appropriately, where you continue to feed energy and new ideas and make this thing better. And I think that sort of like unspoken pretext of how you engage in collaborative work is important, and it's starting to show up in interesting ways, like Archive, ARXIV, the sort of journal aggregator online, just posted yesterday about like the penalties now of having hallucinated citations, or like having like the filler language of like, this table is ready, now just fill it in with real data, or things like that inside the papers. And I think in this instance, it's fundamentally about like rules of collaboration and being adversarial collaborators, because other people are relying on the posts that are put up on Archive to say, okay, this is someone's data, and they put in the appropriate thought, because if I'm going to use this to continue to expand human knowledge, to make a new breakthrough, I need to be able to trust that like you read your own output, as opposed to just flooding the zone with garbage. And so I think we're having to establish new rules about collaboration in a lot of places, and like that starting point of like me and an AI model is like the first place, but then it's like me and a teammate and my AI model and their AI model, and now it's like us and another team at a client company, and that like that network starts to expand, and we're trying to figure out the ways to like maintain that across this like cascadingly increasing complexity.
Joey, you're starting to get at the next section here, which is kind of AI within brands, what we're seeing and what we're hearing from our clients. So Mike, you've said that recently you've had multiple briefs come across your desk that talked about brand engineering or agentic brands. What are the clients actually asking for, and why do you think that's coming now?
Yeah, I mean, on a couple levels. I mean, why now is because obviously AI is the moment that we're in, and I think people identify different opportunities when it comes to efficiency, or especially in, all the tech companies and nearly every company. There's a lot of top-down mandates for becoming AI native, like upskilling or, changing the organization to actually respond to this moment. But the way I see the new opportunities for brands, whether it's creative tooling or software tooling, things that we used to build at Upstatement and then deliver to our clients in the form of like finished assets or brand books, which encoded rules about how to do things. I think you can deliver expertise in a fundamentally different way now. And it's more similar to like building a team inside of a client that would take the work forward. So this has always been sort of, when you're doing any kind of like step change, and let's use a rebrand, for example. You change the identity, you change the brand book, you introduce some complex rules for color and type and layout, and you write all that down in the brand book, and you say, don't squish it, don't squash it, don't kind of like pull things in this way. And you hope to God that the client does that. Yeah. And you hope they have a really good team on their end that can actually pick that up. The model now is that you can actually encode those rules and deliver tools that actually act like teammates inside of an organization that are actually making it easier to express the brand. So you're deeply embedding this intelligence and strategy that you spent a lot of time in the same models that we always use, like coming up with the strategy, refining the actual asset, building a theory of it. But now you can reach way further into a client's organization and across time and actually install your intelligence inside of the organization. And that's something that more people are noticing. And again, there's efficiency gains and there's sort of like coherence gains, just like better alignment. But I think the way that people interact with these rules that experts create is fundamentally changing, and you can encode your expertise in places where it can always be on tap for a client. And that's not something that was really true before, unless, say you were a brand strategist or creative director and you did the rebrand, and then you were like, actually now I'll take a job as head of brand. Yeah. That was the only way you could do it. Yeah. And now that has fundamentally changed. And I think even the value prop of working with a team like ours to install that in a client it is way different than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a brand guidelines as an example is like an interesting, like that's a sort of narrow example of sort of brand engineering as you've talked about it, but is like a valuable one to think about, because you're trying to write down a set of deterministic rules, knowing that there are like infinite permutations of the questions and the utility that this may come up in, but you're saying like, okay, in 200 pages, like don't squish it, don't squash it, don't add a metallic layer, don't invert it, like don't add grass over the top, like trying to come up with as many rules that you can come up with in 200 pages to make sure that someone is representing a visual identity extremely well. But even when you present that document to like a big team or something, someone's gonna like raise their hand and be like, but what do we do when we have to do X? And you're like, oh no, X isn't in the rule set. And I think that the reason is like so much of it is based on taste and intention, and why like a exceptional creative director could take that document and like technically break a rule, but it would still work and be effective because it fit with the intent. But the rest of the team doesn't have that same either expertise or experience, or maybe they're working in the sales department and they just needed a document made. And so having that, like, can you capture intent in some sort of like deterministic model that can then also be sort of flexible enough to be like, well, in this particular instance, have you considered, versus like someone hopping on the phone every time someone has a question,
Yeah, I think that the way, and more specifically, the way I've been thinking about it is like that specific intent and the core choices that a brand is making, I'm thinking about as a brand ontology, which is a set of entities and relationships. So like from the core strategy to the core choices to the core audiences. And then you have different relationships and expressions of those. And some are the sales department that are making landing pages just literally as quickly as they can make them, that are not taking a round trip through the creative department on purpose. It's like, how can they make better tools to raise the floor? But then you're also thinking like, how could a really talented creative director build on top of this intent, break it in certain ways, and that breaking of the system is actually where the system expands itself. And that needs to also happen. Yeah. So it's really an interesting place, because these briefs are often coming from creative or marketing teams and people with really great skill sets when it comes to, whether it's marketing strategy or creative direction or photography, but it's actually forcing them to think algorithmically in a way that they have never really thought before. And so it's really this blending of software engineering principles, like even the idea of an ontology and a core source of truth, and like, how do you take this data set that is really wrapped up with expression, like a brand book is like, it shows you the rules, but through exemplars of like, here's what the ad should look like, here's what the homepage should look like. You have to split all that stuff apart and put it back into a rational system that can be queried in different ways and stay up to date. And so then now you're just doing systems engineering, which is really not something that many people that work in brand or design have ever had to think about beyond, design systems, which are really just other lists of rules. Mm-hmm.
Mike, you were just getting at this, but I'd love to hear from Joey how you're thinking about this on the SYLVAIN side. Do projects like this or hearing about new requests like this kind of reshape the meaning of consulting at all, or even the meaning of brand itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, like, if you come into this with an orientation of looking for opportunities, right? If you're not coming in from that tight place of, this is gonna steal my job, I don't want this to happen, whatever. Like, those things, could be true, but I think that orientation to it sort of closes you up in such a way where you can't identify it. And I think, SYLVAIN and Upstatement coming closer together in partnership is fundamentally about saying, I think about this paper that came out years ago, and it was about innovation within the context of geographies, and cities that had more industries in them had more innovation in them, independently of whether people even worked together. Mm-hmm. But just because you could go to, like, drop your kid off at school and talk to someone who is a lawyer, and then go get a coffee and talk to someone who's an engineer, and go to the grocery store and talk to someone who's in biotech, like, that sort of wider combination of expertise resulted in larger amount of innovation within a city. And so they looked at Raleigh-Durham or like Winston-Salem, like Research Triangle area, compared to New York City, where there are far more industries and there's just like a higher rate of innovation. And so I think bringing teams together that have engineers and like digital brand designers and like designers and strategists and engagement people with a wider set of expertise, if they're colliding with each other more frequently, it creates an opportunity where, you know, Chris, our CSO at SYLVAIN, and Mike Burns, the CTO at Upstatement, are like having conversations. They're like, oh, actually, like maybe there's, Mike's sort of saying like, oh, I could actually add value in some of this work that I was starting from the, like, I would never be relevant to the work that Chris is doing for X, Y, and Z reason. And now they're starting to be like, oh, we could build this thing together to help improve like the output of a piece of work or demonstrate the value or help a client be more effective at implementing something. And I think that sort of not knowing exactly what that output will be, but by bringing people together and like letting them just bounce off of each other, you can like have more interesting, innovative solutions that you don't have to expect what it is beforehand, just like let it happen.
So in thinking about AI, as leaders, you've both had to make decisions and created guidelines and guardrails within your own organization. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Joey, you've described wanting to create a culture of centaurs. What does that mean to you, and what kind of work do you think comes out of that culture?
Yeah, I think my first encounter with that idea was in Kevin Kelly's The Inevitables or Inevitables. I'm not sure exactly the title, but he was the sort of founder of Wired, or like the first editor-in-chief. And he wrote a book in 2016 about a bunch of, I think, 13 technologies that were going to be inevitable. And in the chapter on AI, he talked about this idea that Gary Kasparov had come up with after getting beaten by Big Blue, eventually, the IBM supercomputer at chess. And he got depressed for a while, and he's like, well, wait, they had access to things that I didn't have access to. So what does it look like to bring humans and AIs together to compete against another team of humans and or AIs? And within that model of, I think it's called advanced chess. It may not be advanced chess, but centaurs became the teams with humans and AIs versus a bunch of humans on one side or a bunch of AIs. Centaurs always won. I think there's sort of pros and cons to this scenario. Like chess is like very deterministic, and so now centaurs like don't like actually just AI teams win in that. And so that question of like, how do you bring humans together with AIs to collaborate, to be more effective, to do more, right? The human aspect of the model, of like leaning into your hot modelness, I think matters. I think the sort of broader discourse right now is like, is that a narrow window or not, right? Is you know, because at chess, eventually AIs could just win out, but I think chess is so deterministic, right? It is a board with whatever it is, 12 by 12.
8 by 8, but it's also not a solved game.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a totally solved game like checkers.
Yeah.
I could stick with the chess thing because I'm a huge chess fan.
Yeah.
I think chess is a great example, whether it's like Kasparov and Deep Blue. And, you know, at the time, I think it was seen as this almost like John Henry style thing where it's like, oh, we made a machine that's going to beat the man, and then the machine will just do the thing. Like, we're just going to have steam engines, you know, doing the work instead of the old model. But I think the thing that's happened with chess, especially over even like the last decade, is that not only is there more human interest in chess than ever, like it has not killed the game of chess in the least, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think the model of like how do computers and humans collaborate in this world. So there's chess engines like Stockfish, which are basically playing out all the different lines, because the name of the game in chess is like based on the board position. how many potential futures are there? And there's nearly infinite potential futures. And the best chess players, Kasparovs or Carlsons and things, they're able to calculate very rapidly all the different lines. And they're doing a lot of like pattern recognition. And they're like, I've seen this board position before. I've read about this game that was played in 1875 and I saw this thing happens. But they're actually collaborating with these AI chess engines to just train themselves. And it's not about beating the engine. It's about sort of training and sharpening the human player. And I think it's a false kind of like, who's better at chess, a computer or a human? It's more about like, what can the humans gain from using this chess tool as a trainer, as an adversarial collaborator, as an analytical engine for like, analyze my past games and show me this. And it's not so simple as like, show me where I could have won or show me where I didn't win. So many of the lines you could play are actually highly creative, and even go back like the AlphaGo thing, and that was where they were sort of seeing like, we saw creativity in this game engine that a human never would have seen, and the creativity in the sort of like multi-round decision making that inspires the humans back and gives human players either interest in training in the game or like at the most advanced levels, increases their true creativity with how they see the game. So I love chess as an example because it's one of those things where like models and computation have not killed the game in the least. They've only enriched the human experience and sort of increased the creative capacity for how the best humans can play.
Yeah, I think that I think a lot about the conversations we've been having sort of societally, culturally, in the marketing from some of the founders of these frontier labs about how they're going to the world. And so there are different ways that you can view that. The cynical view of Dario Amodei going out and saying like it's going to kill everybody and it's going to take all your jobs is that he's just looking for regulatory capture, right? For the governments to come in, step in and take things over. And so by sort of like fear mongering, he is both sort of getting people to try and adopt the tools and also scaring Congress or whoever enough to be like, actually, we need to be in charge of that because he wants someone to be in charge of making those decisions instead of himself. But that process winds up feeling extremely zero-sum. Obviously, there is like a risk that is non-zero associated with sort of the acceleration of AI, whether that's environmental, whether that is AGI or ASI takeover or something like that, or whether it is simply the collapse of human knowledge, which a bunch of economists have been talking about for a little while, where you're seeing, you sent me something the other day that was just a tweet of someone saying like, AIs will always talk like millennials because millennials were the people who produce the most content on the internet and people aren't writing things anymore. And so which is a certain type of negative outcome. But I think what you're talking about is sort of a non-zero sum situation where humans get better as AIs get better and we can pursue sort of fundamentally human pursuits and enjoy them. And if an AI is better at chat, like I'm very bad at chess. Like a calculator could play chess better than me because I haven't played chess a bunch. And so like I don't really personally care if a computer is better than me at chess. I'm sort of pursuing like my pursuits with the team and my ambitions with the team, with my family, like as a father, like all of those things. And yeah, I think taking a more win-win orientation to it is maybe it's just my hopeless optimism.
I want to reorient us back toward Upstatement and SYLVAIN and what that Centaur idea looks like within the walls of those two organizations. Can you each speak to that a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're having active dialogue on the teams about how do we use these things and how do we experiment, and sharing experiences of a particular instance or how to prompt differently or what these different things are happening. Nathan, who's the head of the design department at Upstatement, sent sends things on a pretty regular basis to the design chat, which everyone at the company is in, but it's just conversations about design. And he recently sent something about a workflow to get from a sort of like Blender render 3D model thing into Cloud Code, into Flora, into all these things to accomplish the thing that he wanted to do, of just like, oh, I discovered this workflow that was able to accomplish a thing that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish otherwise. We're having at like the sort of all hands last month, we had Mike Burns and Scott Dassey do just like a made up joke, like vibe coding, hackathon type of thing over the course of the meeting. We like started, gave them a prompt, and then ran the whole meeting and talked about all the things we had to talk. And at the end of the meeting, they came and shared things, and it was stupid. It was like a made up porta potty biofuel company, but they sort of like vibe coded this thing and came up with ideas and presented something, and just showing the team what is possible and how to experiment with it in fun ways. And SYLVAIN is doing similar things, office hours and people sharing and having conversations about the models, or this is accomplished, or how do you prompt effectively, how can you sort of bend the model to your will. But I think it's about having those conversations in the open so people feel comfortable talking about them, and trying to promote a culture of experimentation, I think.
Yeah, I was also going to use the Nathan example, and I think especially within an organization like ours, it's important to know like how we expect AI to improve our work. And because we're not in the procedural lane, the improvements we expect to make are not that we could deliver something that used to take us 10 weeks in 2 weeks and that it would be cheaper. That could be true. However, that's not really oriented towards the real value we provide. So Nathan's example of using Claude to operate Blender, a 3D modeling program, which is not inside his skill set or anyone's on the team. In the past, when we've had to work with 3D models or make 3D animations, we would have to work with someone like Ink Studio in the UK. We would have to get the client to spend $30,000 on this very complex workflow with these specific experts. Again, that sort of access to capability that Upstatement just is not invested in. We've never hired a full-time 3D artist because it's just not a thing that we do all the time. However, for many projects, we do need it. And what Nathan was able to do was actually work with this material of 3D that he did not have access to before, using his same intent for like, how can we create impact for the client? How can this inform the work I want to do? It still doesn't replace the best artists. And so when we get to the point of making a video or really polishing and dialing the thing in, we're still going to have to work with someone. Like Nathan knows that's not him, but it did allow us to kind of have this range of creativity, access to a capability we didn't have before, and now that's been integrated into the creative tool set. And so I've seen that for designers for sure, or engineers, where another good example is native iOS applications. Like Cloud Code is pretty great with Swift in a way that we would have had to have multiple people on our team with that specific skill set to do a couple projects a year that we just don't have. So Upstatement never would have made the rational investment in that skill set. And now we can actually make those prototypes and get to a place faster where we do hire an expert eventually. But it's just increased our range of creativity and our ability to provide impact without boundaries for our clients.
Yeah. I think like some work recently that we were doing with the SYLVAIN and the Upstatement teams collaborating, like that came up of like producing a simulator for a particular client. Like conceptually we could do it, the intent, we understand everything, but some of the aspects of particular languages of code that the team was not expert on, we were able to overcome that hurdle because it was both sort of a linchpin in the process, but not like a big, it was like, it's almost like getting stopped up by like a 1 foot tall hurdle because you haven't figured out how to just step over it. And like those smaller barriers are all sort of disappearing like pretty quickly.
So we've talked a lot about experimenting with AI and how experimentation is encouraged at Upstatement and SYLVAIN, but of course there have to be some guardrails. So how did you develop guardrails at each of your organizations, and what do those manifest as?
I mean, there's different types. Yeah, I was going to say shame is a powerful tool. I think I think we're still figuring that out, to be honest. And there are some places that are similar to the old model where there's data security policies and data retention policies and just things like do not please install CloudBot on computers that have access to Upstatement accounts. There's basic things like that where there's some sort of common sense security type of stuff. And now I think even cognitive security, which is like, do not let Claude tell you that your idea is awesome and then submit that to a client.
Yeah.
Like, check it with somebody. And that's where I think that the group chat is really useful because we're exploring this material, we're finding its edges, we're sensing where there's risk. There have not been any mega fails yet, like no production code bases have been deleted because we're pretty careful with this stuff. And I think this is where you kind of have to hold both things in your mind. You have to be like, it's totally possible that this thing could make our work so much better in all these ways. And then you also have to activate your inner Mike Burns, which is like, but we will never install it on a client until I'm completely sure that it will not cause deep damage to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the attention that we're constantly navigating, probably erring more on the side of conservative security when it comes to things, especially that are for clients or things that are exposed to PII or credit card numbers or production databases. And I think that's just professional caution. But at the same time, we are really trying not to have boundaries when it comes to like I never want to make someone feel like they shouldn't try something.
Yeah.
I actually think that's like, you should try everything, again, within reason. But like try it, and like you're only going to know if it works or how it works if you try it once. And failing is actually not a fail here because you just activated another learning loop of like, oh, I see how that failed. I see why I would not reach for that right now, or why I would, and actually I should update the group intelligence that we can use that now. And that's part of what Nathan did with Blender, is now Upstatement sees it's possible to do this sort of thing. And now other people are going to start exploring that, where maybe as a group, they weren't sure if they could do that before.
Yeah, I mean, I think like in gymnastics, when someone is learning how to do gymnastics, they have like a foam pit, or like someone's, like a BMXer or a motocross person, they have these giant foam pits where they're like, you don't just like one day determine like, I'm going to do a double backflip on this dirt bike. You're like, I'm going to do a double backflip into a foam pit, and eventually, hopefully, I'll figure out how to do it. And I think that is an example of like creating a safe environment for experimentation. Like, I don't know if I can do like a round off triple back handspring or something. I don't know enough about gymnastics to continue the metaphor, but I think, where and how are you experimenting? Because, I look at something like when that AI researcher at Meta, like, put CloudBot on their computer and deleted their entire email history of like, tens of thousands of emails. And I'm like, theoretically, they are much more expert at this than I am as an AI researcher at like one of the major companies pushing model development, and they still made this kind of mistake. Like, if I did that, I don't have some army of engineers in the back end, hopefully, who can recover all of that information for me or whatever. And so I know that if experts are out over their skis right now, but I know for sure I'm out over my skis, even if it doesn't feel like it in a particular moment. And so I have to make sure I'm not like slamming into a tree.
Yeah. I think the other thing, like the orientation towards experimentation is, something on the Upstatement side. Like since 2022, and some of the earliest versions of Midjourney, like Scott and the design team have been playing with this, and originally it was a joke. It was, we've seen tools like this before. There's been sort of like diffusion models that would sort of make things, and you're like, that's interesting. And then it started to get a little bit more real, and then it started to be a little more controllable. But I think it's always come from, like, we try to encourage experimentation by playing around with it, and that's something, even at the leadership level, that's like a huge part of our day, is like understanding the landscape, trying it, making a horrible image, posting it to Design Talk, making fun of it, but then, actually talking about what worked and why. And that's been a process that's been going on for at least 4 years at Upstatement, just with AI. Yeah. It actually extends much further into the past. Like, it's always some of the most meaningful contributions to Upstatement's culture and tech stack and things like that have been a summer intern who was with us in 2012 who was like, I think this tool is cool, my friends are using it, let's try using it. And then the organization accepts that. And they're not like, sorry, we don't use that tool here. Read the manual, we use these other tools. You kind of say like, that's cool, let's see how it works. And the organization is good at metabolizing new things for that way.
Yeah. Like I did a ton of experimentation as like a bunch of these, Midjourney or like early, ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever, when I was doing I was trying to do like a sci-fi D&D campaign with my friends. And so I was like, well, there's not like random images of these made up scenarios that I'm doing. So I was like getting Midjourney and experimenting with it to like produce images of creatures I was creating, or like, trying to see as new models would come out. Like we did a fun team survey here about something. I don't even remember what it was about, but I was like, oh, can this model do a factor analysis? Like this is not for a client. There's not like something important hinging on it. And so then I'm like going, and it could sort of do a factor analysis. And so I knew like, okay, maybe in a couple of years we'll be at the point where a data set could like run through a k-means cluster or something like that. And so, but that figuring out those, like that constant being like, can it do this? Can it do this? Like prepares you for like with some amount of anticipation of like when a thing might be coming.
I have one more question for Mike, but Joey, you can also jump in. So Mike, you've compared this moment to early digital transformation when computers were first wheeled into offices and you needed an IBM technician in order to set them up. But now everyone is their own technician. What does that mean for how creative roles are being redefined and who does what on a team in 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a digital transformation moment because there's obviously a lot of capability and there's a lot of access to the capability and there's a lot of incentives for exploring it, but there's still uneven distribution about how it works. And so whether it's on an in-house team or our role as a consultancy, or even a lot of the frontier models are partnering with consultancies to do some of this configuration and setup, you kind of need that role on the team that's going to be like, I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to go towards this. Maybe they're just they have more proclivity for a new thing, so they want to try something different. Or they're more of a systems thinker in a team of people who that was not really their role before. But I think there's got to be a sort of a catalyst who's actually got to kind of get into the work, use their subject matter expertise on whatever that team is, but also sort of act as like the leader of trying things. And when I say leader, I probably don't mean in the traditional hierarchical sense. I just mean like they're trying things on the team. They're showing an experiment. They're showing their teammates how to set things up. You kind of need that natural ladder of expertise where someone has actually kind of pushed the frontier forward and then they show everyone how to do it. And I think it's a major opportunity in this moment because there's no shortage of incentives or fear, whether people are fearful that their jobs are going to be replaced or they're going to be left behind or they're not going to make it or they're going to be in the permanent underclass. There's a lot of that stuff going on and none of that is super helpful to developing this expertise, but what's more important is the actual pull from someone who's embedded on the team, who's showing their colleagues how to use it. They're sort of doing active sense making of the tool and being that sort of guide. And more organizations are sort of recognizing that as a type of person they need on their team with an orientation to the problem. And I think this is where we're also seeing more of the briefs come in because it is tricky to find those people. They don't exist yet. Or there may be people who are extremely junior who haven't been given permission to do that all the way yet. And those are the sort of like people that we're finding and the ways that we're partnering with these organizations.
Yeah. I think the ramp example is sort of an interesting one where they've tried to bypass the technical hurdle of having to go into your computer's console and set up a Git repo and all of those things to be able to use some of the agentic tools. And so they're guiding people not necessarily in explicitly how to use it, but to overcome the technical barriers to being able to start to experiment explicitly with sort of like the agentic coding tools. And so, that those specific tools may or may not be relevant for every company, but that example of how do you make sure that there is not such a significant barrier within your team that like you can't even get to the point of experimenting, right? Like I think about like a mountain road. Like there's a guardrail along the outside, and I think a lot of these tools right now are like the road got built, but we haven't had time to build the guardrail yet, and like you run the risk of someone who doesn't know how to drive very well just getting in a car and like launching themselves off the cliff. Like, and so that balance between getting someone technical expertise or over the technical hurdles to actually be able to do something with the risk profile of getting someone like close to their kernel is, you know, where the calculus sits.
Okay, a little bit of a different take on creative roles getting redefined. Mike, you've said before that there's potential to close the gap between product and marketing disciplines. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think this is something a lot of people are realizing, and it's not just product and marketing, it's also design and engineering and leadership and different teams that are supposed to be oriented towards a craft. Again, as the capability to make things has become much more widely distributed, it's starting to put focus on a job role like a product manager who was always tasked with understanding the business logic and the sort of incentives of like what the product needed to do. But they had to stop short of actually designing a feature or solution. Yeah. And then they had to also stop short of implementing that feature. And now that capability is so widely distributed, what's to stop a product manager from saying like, I actually think that this type of feature is what we're looking for, and to build a prototype and to test that prototype with users. And this is what you're seeing on a micro level with startups, where it's like, they're not going to build those same systems in that same way, that were actually oriented around craft kind of differences. Whereas, you know, a designer, even if they were more code oriented, was not a software engineer that was trusted to push production code into the product environment. And now that's going to be different. And it's so blurry. I think it's really blurry. And I think there's a lot of, you know, I think product managers would say like, we're the only ones that are going to be left. And designers are saying the same thing, and engineers are saying the same thing. But I think it just speaks to the generalism that is actually most important to kind of understand how these things work. And then even beyond an individual role or an individual team, I think people that are designing companies like this, whether it's like in a software environment or even an agency or even a retail business, they're thinking rightfully about like, how should this system actually work now? Because it doesn't have to be organized around a more 20th century homing of people that went to different schools that understand different techniques. That's no longer the barrier.
Yeah. I mean, that's where that like death of expertise comes in, and like what does the product manager need to learn about design or engineering in order to do it, and are they respecting those disciplines? And the question of like, well, if it was normally going waterfall, right? Like a product manager was talking to customers and they're saying we need this feature, and so they map it out and what are the, you know, product requirement doc, and it goes to design and they figure out what does that look like and how are the interactions going, and the engineer does it. Now, you know, builds it out. The engineer could be thinking about new tools and talking to customers too, and building a thing and then throwing it at design and the product manager and saying like, what do you guys think of this, and vice in each of those other ones. And so in theory you could be going like making sure you're capitalizing on each group through the process, but that's in theory.
Joey, how are you seeing this at SYLVAIN between strategy and design? You know, historically they're pretty distinct disciplines. Are you seeing collaboration change now?
I mean, I think we've continued to see collaboration change over the year. Even before this window, right? It was, you know, strategists learning how to use design tools to a competency to be able to interact, right? Like Figma or Creative Suite or some of these other tools, and vice versa. It is designers coming into strategic exercises and challenging thinking or understanding research methodology and helping to develop stimuli or something like that. Like that blurring of becoming better at your sort of home domain, like where is home base, by understanding where those things can go. Like I always felt, even before we had really built out the design group, that like our strategists were really great because they were doing both innovation and brand work, and invariably those two things were connected. Like if you built a new product, you might have to build a new brand for it, and if you built a new brand, in theory it should inform your product roadmap. And so because they could think about those two things, often we were sort of jumping into the next team to help make sure the fidelity was working by adding design and creative, and now with Upstatement, like digital design and engineering and brand through digital thinking. It's just sort of expanding that, like that sort of bottom of the T-shape for everybody, and it makes every solution that we come up with, I think, more effective just by understanding what exists.
As a final sign-off, I would love to hear in a couple sentences from each of you. We've talked a lot about all of these different things that are informing good work today. But what is your take on what good work looks like today for your companies and your expertise in the age of AI?
I mean, I think good work is going to look a lot like what good work has always looked like, which is people cared about it and they really thought about it and spent time investing themselves in that work, whatever it is. They identified collaborators they could work with that would make it better, and they sort of reached a new conclusion that no one would reach on their own. I haven't really seen the definition of good craft change at all, and I think it's really comes down to care and attention and someone unreasonably willing to invest all that time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and maybe I'll answer something to the side just to have a different response, but I think that opening of the aperture and thinking about the utility and value of what you're bringing, even if that utility and value is purely like artistic, right? We're in this moment where there is sort of a flood of the market of like digital equivalents of like tchotchkes, right? Like a thing that is easy and cheap to make and is not understanding where it fits in the world, but you're like, but it's cheap, you want it, right? Like it's like a quarter vending machine with a bunch of like crappy plastic toys inside of it. And I think that question of exactly what you said of is it well built? Is it built to last? Can it scale? Can it do those things? Like that all of that language that we have these phrases around are fundamentally about sort of, is it worthy? Is it effective? Like, should it exist? And I think we're going through a wave where there's a lot of vaporware being thrown out into the world because we don't know what else to do with this, or we're trying to figure it out, or like, can I go this far? And I think that is sort of like that like divergent convergent thing. I think we're gonna like start at some point. When is that, this year? Is it next year? Or whenever, like honing back in and saying like, we don't need like more new things. We can only manage so many things in our memory, but can we start to produce something that has that level of craft in this new collaborative environment?
Good craft is going to be an increasing differentiator because there is the ability to create so much stuff so quickly. And I think people are becoming fatigued by the amount of new stuff. And even inside of one of those pieces of stuff, there is still too much going on. We're kind of in that early stage, like, look at how much we can make, how fast we can make it. And I think there's going to be a new appreciation for remember when things were smart and well made and respected my time and attention. And I think there's going to be a new appreciation for how you get to that place, which is going to be new tools, but it's going to be the same exact mindset that's always produced good things.
Yeah, I mean, I like the hope is even that we can, because of some of that ease, like break some models that are like becoming like increasingly exhausting. Like my Samsung TV wanting to charge me $50 a year to like have a picture on it, or you know, the mattress that wants to charge you for a subscription, or like those types of models that are sort of born out of that ZERP era and like the financialization, right? Like when innovation stops happening, then you just evolve to like innovating in financialization. And I think we're hopefully in a model where new innovation is facilitated and easier to produce. And so some of these things where I saw something recently where a woman was like, I have to buy a subscription to the printer that I purchased and the ink that I purchased to print a photo. Like, why do I need a subscription to use the printer that I already purchased? Like, that to me is like an example of an excess of financialization and not thinking about providing new value. And so, you know, that's my like dream, that we can produce a thing that is providing value as opposed to producing a thing that is extracting value.
Yeah, another way to look at the distribution of capability now is like you've almost got this mass industrialization where there's going to be a Joey who comes home one night and looks at his Samsung TV and is like, you know what? I'm going to make a new TV.
Yeah.
So this never happens to anyone again. And your ability to do that now is going to be a lot easier than before. It's still difficult, but like it just became like exponentially easier for you to have that idea and to connect with the people that you need to make it happen. And you've got to stick to it, but it's no longer a pipe dream for you. And it's going to be different for all those people that have kind of gone down the financialization, like, you know, trying to get incremental gains because they kind of owned the thing. There's going to be a totally new competitive environment as people are rapidly making new things that the world truly needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the examples in the group chat that have shown up are like the person who is making microchips at home is like going through the effort to figure out how to produce like RAM at home so that it combats the crisis, or the person who's 3D printing like with mixed materials so that, you know, he's at a point where he thinks he can produce like electrically embedded 3D printing.
Or doing your own sequencing of your cancer's genome, like
for your
because
dog.
for your dog, no lab would do it for you. This current system is not really oriented around that, but like that's now you can do that if you are sufficiently motivated.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe because of this crisis of anxiety and sort of existential dread that is coming with AI and that tightness again, even when we were talking about like our teams collaborating, like that tightness creates an environment where you can't imagine what the positive possibilities are because you're afraid of the negative outcomes. And of course, like we should be considering the negative outcomes. We should not go into any situation and produce a solution where you're not thinking about the impact of that. And also, it makes it really difficult to imagine those situations. And I think it is through the trickle of new things coming out and someone who wasn't feeling that dread or was particularly motivated by something like not wanting to lose their dog, that they're able to demonstrate what sort of the new environment of what's possible instead of being like, well, slap a subscription on it. That'll do. You know, like that's our innovation.
I feel like I got it all out.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, good job.